I'm Ryan, and this is the Sound Project. Today we have Joe Salvatto from EQUI TECH joining us. So firstly, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So we met, it was a couple of years ago at NAMM actually. And so EQUI TECH was like a completely new thing to me. So we'll talk about that a little bit down the road.
Sure.
But firstly, I'd just like to hear, like what's your involvement with music? Like what got you into the industry and what do you do with EQUI TECH?
I'm one of those very fortunate people that walked in and sat down. I never made coffee. I never did all those things that interns or anybody does. I got a phone call from my professor at the college that I went to, and he says, I went on this job interview the other day. Mm-hmm. It's not for me, but I think it's for you. He says, you know how to fix tape recorders, right? And I said, sure. No clue. And I walked into this place, and it was called S.O.U.N.D. It was a major recording studio in New York City. And from that moment on, it was one success story after another. I went into the maintenance area. I'm not a musician by nature,
sure,
but I have a great appreciation for music. And being technologically based and being a maintenance guy, and instinctively, that's how I got the job. And I've always been that person.
That's cool.
I've been a recording engineer, but I feel that I'm kind of the race car mechanic that can drive the car around the track, but I don't win any races. So I know how to operate the equipment, obviously, and I'm very familiar with it from the inside out.
Sure.
That's kind of I went from media to A&R recording to giant recording to Electric Lady, right track recording, and then I started my own company.
Cool.
Which is Salvatto Sound. But during that time, the EQUI TECH paradigm is what brought me to work for EQUI TECH.
Okay.
Jan said to me, you know more about our products than anybody that we've ever met. Mm-hmm. And it appears that you should work for us. And I said, well, okay. And now I love this position because I solve problems for other people.
Right.
When anybody calls, I already know the answer for the most part, and I feel very comfortable about that. I don't mean to sound pompous about it, but the fact is after putting hundreds of EQUI TECHs in various places and studios, barns, boats, basements, you get kind of a feel for what's going to work.
Yep. That's awesome. So is your actual background in like engineering then, or the fact that it's not exclusively like audio, like what was in university, what was the thing that made your professor say like, hey, you're the right fit for that job?
It was electrical technologies.
Okay.
When digital concepts were still evolving.
Okay.
And the reason he said that is because I brought a tape recorder to a lab that we were doing.
Yeah.
And he said, wow, you got a tape recorder. And a TIAC reel to reel. And that was what spawned his thought to me to come and that this job would be for me.
That's cool.
Because at Media Sound, they had a major maintenance shop, which was obviously analog based.
Sure.
And that was the connection. I did not plan this. And I believe that all things in life are best serendipitous. And that's exactly, I didn't send out resumes. I just walked in one day.
That's awesome.
And I met one guy who became my mentor. And eventually he told me that I should go to work for A&R Recording. I says, well, I like where I'm working. He says, you don't understand. This is A&R Recording Studio. You ever hear a guy named Phil Ramone? I says, I guess. And that was the beginning of a huge streak of record albums, movie dates, jingle sessions, all operating at the same time under the guise of this mammoth studio in Manhattan. Being there gave me a tremendous confidence in the way that we worked because I was surrounded by great maintenance engineers. Elliot Shiner was on staff. The record labels we had double bookings for all the rooms all the time.
Wow. Okay.
So as a result, there was a huge vitality to the studio. Mm-hmm. And when you come from that, we used to buy tape by the pallet. We didn't just buy it by the roll.
Sure.
So all these things put together gave you a sense of higher education. Mm-hmm. And we just went to an affair with all the old A&R guys. And I says, I didn't belong to the Kiwanis Club. I didn't belong to any fraternities in school, but I did belong to the fraternity of A&R Recording. And from that, everybody that says A&R, which doesn't mean artist and repertoire, by the way, it means Arnold and Ramone. It was Phil Ramone's studio. This became legendary for everybody. And I didn't realize it until it was gone. And obviously he's now a travel agency or something. But it was a great career. And every day that I wake up, in all the years that I've gone to work, I've run to work. I've loved my job.
That's awesome.
And being the maintenance guy, you have a certain level of importance to both client and management.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a certain bit of political balance that you have to create there.
Sure.
But I've never stopped loving the job. And that's why doing this puts me into other people's studios that need me and that have the reality of how do we get rid of our buzz, hums, clicks, and pops?
Yep.
And that's probably 40% of all maintenance issues is keeping it quiet and keeping the sound pure. And when EQUI TECH came along and I realized what it was capable of, I said, we've been waiting for this. The idea of having a system that is so globally influential. Every booth on that floor at NAMM requires an EQUI TECH, but nobody really realizes it until you've either tried it or experienced it or had somebody tell you about it. I would say that at least a dozen people in the 2 days I've been there have either owned EQUI TECH or worked for EQUI TECH.
Okay.
And one person that came along that said his EQUI TECH was burned up in a fire. Yep. And Jan, I spoke with the owner of the company, and she says, anybody that lost their EQUI TECH in a fire, she says, we're going to give them a severe discount to get them back up and running.
Yep.
And I think that's tremendously altruistic and also brings to mind the fact that everybody that has an EQUI TECH can now get one because they're really reasonable. You mentioned about new products. We now have a 1R, which is a 10 kVA device, which is 1,000 watts.
Okay.
And it would work perfect for the average studio. So everybody can afford it. It's reasonably priced. It's available in all the major video and audio box stores. And I think now everybody's going to have it. And we're trying to educate people both scholastically and industrially that EQUI TECH has a presence and a value because of what it does. And can I give you the concept?
Yeah, I was going to say, so let's actually back up a little bit and talk about, so many of our listeners are primarily studio, either owners or workers or what have you. So for those that don't know about EQUI TECH, what is the product itself? What does it do?
It's a big transformer and it's overbuilt in its size. When people have seen it that understand inductive theory, say that's too big a transformer for what it's doing. That's in fact the truth. But because of that, what the transformer does is it takes the power out of the wall, whether it's a 15 amp plug or a 20 amp plug, in the conventional sense. This is for rack units. They make wall units too, but this is for your basic Pro Tools rig in your bedroom or what have you, or your studio. Or you plug it in, and on the back of the EQUI TECH, it has outlets on the back. It spits out 60 volts on the left-hand hole and 60 volts on the right with respect to the ground. Why is that important? Well, every piece of audio equipment that we've ever used is DC on the inside. So as soon as it gets from the plug into the box, it goes through a bridge rectifier or a AC to DC converter. When it does that, it's now being fed symmetrical power on both ends of the bridge rectifier to feed its power. Why is that important? Well, because the bridge rectifier is the noise in the system. When you put your ear to your speakers and hear hiss, that's not systemic noise. I always thought originally before EQUI TECH, it was tube noise or it was transistor switching. No, it's not. It's the sound of a dirty bridge rectifier trying to cope with something called common mode rejection. Common mode rejection is that ability to take a sine wave and cut it in half and only keep the top portion of it. Everything's on the bottom is now going down the drain, so to speak. That drain was the neutral in a conventional outlet. No more. Now it's being fed power on both sides of the bridge, hence a tremendously quieter system. Almost immeasurable levels of common mode rejection. And everybody said, well, what took them so long? Well, it was the idea of building a transformer to such high specifications that only robotics could be able to make it happen. And at the time when the transformer was being developed, that technology and that mechanics had come into prominence. That's why the transformer works. The transformer is exclusive to EQUI TECH. It is made by a major manufacturer, worldwide manufacturer, only for EQUI TECH. So that's why you don't see other brands having balanced power, because EQUI TECH has the patent on this transformer and its exclusivity.
Sure.
So yeah, EQUI TECH does, okay, now we say it's quiet and it's great. Now play some of your files that you listen to it. And it never fails. I just wait for it. You plug it in, you let the guy bring up the faders and listen, and he turns over and he looks, he says, what just happened? And I love that expression, is because everybody that listens to it, nobody doesn't say, I don't get this. What was that?
Right.
It's not like that. It's not a filter. It's not a DSP device. It is a dumb transformer that takes power and feeds it into your electronics the way it was meant to be. Up until this point, it's never been able to do that. And equivocally, this is why it's globally needed for everybody else.
So with that, I'm not going to name drop another brand, but there's obviously like lots of other power conditioners and things like that that you see in studios. So do you want to talk about like the difference between, like, I know it's the transformer, but like what makes the EQUI TECH so much different than those other power conditioners?
Because of the fact that it takes all of those other devices keep the 110 volts, 120 volts on one side of the outlet. The other side is 0 volts. EQUI TECH puts the voltages on both sides of the outlet. That's the reason. It's being fed symmetrical power. All of the other devices only feed it from one side.
Okay.
That's basically it. I mean, there was a moment when one of the others unnamed manufacturers did have balanced power in their line. And that's going back over 15 years, well before my tenure here. And they don't make that anymore. I happened to come across one of them at one of my clients, and I got to measure it. And sure enough, it was putting out 60 volts on the left and 60 volts on the right. But they don't have the rights to use the patent, nor do they have the transformer. Right. So that's the difference. And not to say that those manufacturers don't have merit. Those guys make great rack distribution, power distribution, all that stuff's very important. EQUI TECH doesn't do that.
Sure.
We've thought about doing some sort of rack-mounted electrical distribution, but it's something we're not doing right now.
Sure.
But that's the difference. And believe me when I say, our show here is the industry ones. You go to the audiophile shows, and they have devices that look like they were built on Mars for power consumption. They're huge battery backups. By the way, battery backups is a great way to circumvent the problems of noise from the lines and such.
Sure.
But that's not what EQUI TECH does. EQUI TECH does it from a strictly basic concept, using everybody's conventional outlet in the wall and going into the box, and it then puts out power for your entire room.
Sure. And then EQUI, so primarily, like, so far we've been talking about the ones that you plug into the wall where it's a rack unit, but then EQUI TECH also has wall units as well.
Clearly. Those are mostly built for larger installations. It's a circuit breaker panel, and in the circuit breaker panel, it has the large transformer in the bottom of it. They come in a variety of sizes. Some of them are 50 amp, 100 amp, 200 amps. Okay. And they are very, very large. They definitely can be retrofitted to most installations, but it requires orange outlets because all the power has to go through isolated ground outlets for the EQUI TECH to function properly.
Sure, that makes sense.
So, but we actually see EQUI TECHs come out of installations when people move. They'll take the panel off the wall. It's like a piece of, it's like any other piece of rack gear. You take it with you.
Right. Well, especially like when you make that kind of investment too, like it only makes sense.
Not leaving it for the landlord.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So all of that being said, so if someone has questions about EQUI TECH or they want to know how to incorporate that into the studio, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
At the website at equitech.com, you'll be able to send a message to me through that point.
Great.
I answer all calls really quickly because I know that there's some immediacy of the need for those people that are interested in it and also have them and have problems with them, if there is such a thing. So that would be one way of doing it. And I can also communicate directly with them through my company, Salvatto.sound. And I'll be able to help you with that directly. Okay.
Excellent. Well, Joe, thank you again so much for being a part of the podcast. I was really excited to have you on.
My pleasure, Ryan. I've been waiting to do it for you because you guys are exactly the kind of company that we want to see using EQUI TECH all the time when it can be afforded.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Well, thank you again. And that's been another episode of The S.O.U.N.D Project, and we will see you next week.